Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English 1110. This is your week 2 overview lecture, where I'm going to walk you through what assignment you have due for the week, as well as what readings and viewings you need to complete in order to get to that assignment. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as usual, as you already saw in my first lecture, I am going to hope that my tiny cat does not have a lot to say during this lecture, so we can get through it very quickly. So again, this is your week 2 overview of readings, viewings, lectures, and assignments that you need to complete this week in order to be able to make it to the next week of the semester. So for this week, you have 2 lectures to watch or listen to, 2 readings to complete, 4 music videos to watch, and 1 discussion board post to write. Now I've added arrows here to indicate what order you should ideally do these things in. I, of course, am not there with you while you are doing your work, so you may elect to go in a different order, but this is the recommended order that to me will make for the most, seamless process for going through all of the different things that you have to do for the week. I believe that if you go out of this order, it gets a little bit more complicated. Of course, with the lectures, I have them represented in a single square, but as you know from your schedule of assignments, you will ideally listen to / watch 1 at the beginning and 1 towards the end of the weekly assignment process. So I want to very quickly recap our deadline kind of situation for the semester. So all work is assigned, kind of on a month-by-month basis, of course. If we think about this month, May, all work assigned in May can be submitted up until the last day of the month, which this month is May 31st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Yes, that time frame is set in stone. So if you are submitting work to me after that 11:59 p.m. Eastern time frame, it counts as not being submitted by the monthly deadline. Weekly deadlines for assignments are recommended, not required, but the monthly deadline is a hard deadline. So what this means is that I will not accept late work for the month, which in this case we're talking about May, beyond the last day of the month, which for this month is May 31st, unless you have arranged an alternate submission timeline with me in advance. So for example, let's say something happens where just health-wise or mental health-wise or just life-wise, you're not able to submit an assignment by the monthly deadline, you will need to check in with me and kind of talk with me, and we can figure out kind of an alternate kind of submission timeline to ensure that you get that work submitted. Do not assume that you have more time without talking to me. You always need to check in with me if you are moving outside of those weekly and monthly deadlines. So discussions about late work submissions should take place prior to the deadline. For example, inquire about extensions with enough time for me to reply, not the day of or the night of the deadline. When students ask me the day something is due, if they can have an extension, I generally assume that means you did not do the work. And I assume that means you did not set aside the time all month to do the work. Not the best look. If you find, for example, you're struggling a few days before the deadline, that would be an appropriate time to check in with me. Even the day before the deadline would be appropriate, just not on the day that something is due, okay? Because a lot of times when stuff is due, for example, I'm not looking at my email at that 11:59 p.m. Eastern time frame, and so it just is not a great chance of hearing back from me, okay? You only need to reach out to me to discuss an extension if you are requesting more time beyond the monthly deadline. So that is, if you need more time than, in this case, for example, if you need longer than May 31st to do an assignment, check in with me. It is not guaranteed. You need to check in with me to get that green light first. If you are planning to use the monthly deadline, you do not need to notify me. So what that means is if you do not turn in the work by the recommended weekly deadline, you don't need to let me know in advance that you're planning to use the monthly deadline. I'm just going to assume that it is the case. Unless I don't see a submission from you on the first day of the month, then I'm assuming you just did not do the assignment unless we've talked about it in advance, okay? So as a reminder, in your schedule of assignments, which is one of 2 documents you should be very, very familiar with, I have a weekly breakdown of my expectations for you in terms of readings, viewings, assignments, and lectures. So you'll see for this week, it will say week 2, patriotism and American pride. That's the theme that we are exploring this week. And it is for the week of May 16th to May 22nd. And it walks you through step by step, again, what you're expected to do and the ideal order that you will do those things in. Now, every overview lecture that I do every week will kind of reiterate the same information. I found generally that students stay the most organized if they consult the schedule of assignments first and then watch the overview lecture, just because then it'll be repeated back to you. If you rely exclusively on one mode, that can also be fine, but I also sometimes will mention things in the overview lecture that are not represented in your weekly installment on the schedule of assignments, okay? So make sure that you're always looking at the correct weekly installment. You want to make sure that you're not accidentally looking ahead or that you are behind. So for this week, I ask that you first watch the video titled Week 2 Overview, which if you are listening to this lecture and watching it, then you are already doing that. But the Week 2 Overview is the lecture that accompanies the slides that walk through, or that the Week 2 Overview lecture is the video lecture that accompanies the slides. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Either way, it should make sense, gradually as you go through the semester, because it's the same every week. Okay. And then after engaging with the overview lecture, I ask that you next read the 2 assigned articles posted to Carmen, and links to these articles are posted to the Week 2 module on our Carmen page. Now, the 2 articles are your secondary sources for the week. If you do not recall what the term secondary source means, pause this lecture and go back to the Week 1 lecture, as that is where I define that term. Now, the first source that you're going to be looking at this week is Here's What Made in USA Actually Means by Dennis Green from Business Insider. I want you to take your time with this one. It is not super, super lengthy, but it is going to be helpful for you as you start to think a little bit about, from an economic standpoint, what does it mean when we say that something is made in America or made in the USA? So this week is going to really be our point of entry into talking about Americanness from kind of a very traditional patriotic lens, right? Our goal this semester is not to exclusively remain within that positive patriotic lens when talking about Americanness, but this is sort of a crucial first step for getting our bearings in terms of talking about what does somebody perhaps assume or mean economically or financially when they're talking about something as being made in the USA. And of course, this will help us to build out more of a discussion about how people, places, things, ideologies, and so on do or do not fall into this categorization, okay? So the Dennis Green article is from 2017, so I wanted to flag that it is going to be including context from something that was relevant at that point in time. And so it's always good to pay attention to, when reading an article, what kinds of references are they making, perhaps in the introduction to their piece, to make sure that somebody who's reading it at that given time would be able to put something in context. And this, of course, will be useful to us as people still engaging with this article beyond the contemporary moment of the writing. Okay, if you struggle a little bit with what this article is saying in terms of differentiating between qualified and unqualified claims of kind of being made in the US, that is totally fine. I will talk about those things in the in-depth lecture, but I promise that there's no comprehensive final that mandates that you know exactly and precisely the difference between those two things. We're looking here as a starting point, not as the end-all be-all. Okay. The second text you're looking at is The Truth About Made in the USA Products by Alyssa Mertes, and it's posted to Quality Logo Products. This was initially written in 2019 and then updated in 2020. It stays pretty much the same between that update, but in the syllabus, I still have it written as 2019. This one is formatted quite differently than the Dennis Green piece. So I want you to pay some attention to format in terms of how is this particular author electing to share information with the reader compared to Dennis Green, who has a very traditional approach in terms of kind of, what we would expect to see in an article of having, a series of paragraphs that kind of look identical to one another. Whereas with the Alyssa Mertes piece, we have, a text that is kind of incorporating different graphics, different images, different just kind of pieces that are all going to fit together into a different kind of discussion. So I want you to be attentive to the difference between how these two authors go about talking about the same concept, same theme, right? But I want you to also notice how they're providing examples and evidence as how they do this is quite different between the two pieces, although they ultimately are talking about the same thing. So I'm looking forward to talking about that a bit more with you in my in-depth lecture as well. So please, please, please make sure that you've read those articles before watching the in-depth lecture. Otherwise, the in-depth lecture might just feel all over the place and confusing. I wanted to just also give you a quick reminder that when you watch my video lectures on YouTube, I always timestamp them, which means that I have divided the lecture into smaller subsections and have indicated when they start and stop in the YouTube description box. So as you'll notice here, When you click on one of my video lectures, you should see some small capitalized gray text that says show more. If you click on that, it should expand and allow you to see the full menu of timestamps, which I will model for you here. This is going to be the dropdown of what you should be able to see in the description box. If for some reason those don't come up for you, let me know and I will make sure to correct that promptly. Again, I designed this not with the intent that you don't watch the whole lecture, but again, I'm not with you, so I can't control what you do or do not watch. However, I designed the description box to have this information because when it comes to writing process post assignments and when it comes to reviewing certain concepts or certain discussions, I wanted to make it a little bit easier for you to be able to skip around the lecture as opposed to having to kind of do that manually by moving your cursor throughout the kind of play bar at the top. So this is there in the hopes that it will help you be able to replay or repeat something if you're having a hard time with a certain bit of information, or if you're doing an assignment and you need to kind of review a certain concept. The hope is that this makes that a bit easier for you, though I also make the Google Slides available for you in the hopes that that will also help to accomplish that as well, okay? All right, so then finally, after you have worked through these materials, I ask that you then watch the following music videos. And there are links on Carmen to the YouTube videos in the week 2 module. And these are gonna be your primary sources for the week. And if the term primary source doesn't look familiar, hit pause on this lecture and go back to the week 1 lecture, which is where I define that term. Also, if you're struggling with differentiating between primary and secondary sources, don't hesitate to reach out to me via email if you want to have me kind of help walk through those with you. Or if it would be helpful, I'm also happy to talk about them in office hours as well. All right, so your music videos for this week are Carrie Underwood's All-American Girl from 2009. Yes, the resolution is awful. YouTube was not always high definition, so just kind of bear with it when it comes to Carrie Underwood. This is a text I want you to just kind of be thinking about sort of different visual details that help to just kind of track how Carrie Underwood and her creative team are visualizing the narrative provided through the lyrics. As is the case with many country songs, All American Girl is one that has a very clear-cut narrative. And so I want you, as you're watching this text, to be very attentive to how it is interpreting those lyrics in a visual form. How is it making use of costumes, making use of background characters, of settings? What's the significance of Carrie Underwood as our protagonist or narrator who is occupying much of this video, right? And I also want you to pay attention to things like race, gender, sexuality, right? How are any of those details kind of represented in this text? Are they represented in the lyrics? Are they represented in visuals? Are they represented in both of them? All of those are going to be very helpful because part of my purpose for assigning these 4 music videos is to get you to begin thinking about how does one go about defining or contributing to social definitions of what it means to belong to or not belong to a particular group, okay? So that is the first music video I have for you. The second is Toby Keith's Made in America from 2011. Much of Toby Keith's kind of portfolio, I guess, for lack of a better word, is comprised of texts about Americanness and patriotism, allegiance to the military. So this is definitely not out of his kind of realm of kind of focus and expertise. This text is very much kind of providing us with a similar argument to what we see of the Carrie Underwood text. In terms of a patriotic view of Americanness. However, the visual details and the lyrics that he chooses to go with here are quite different from her text. So I want you to be very attentive to how he's using lighting cues, how is he using live performance or concert footage compared to kind of a, a filmed look at like kind of the family structure. What are the settings he's working with? How are we seeing different people represented, right? And color is going to be a really big one in this one as well. So I want you to really think about how is he using these kinds of visual details to really complement and extend the impact of his kind of lyrical messaging, which we also see with Carrie Underwood, right? Both of these texts very much are providing us with visuals that are in harmony with the lyrics. We're not necessarily getting an abrupt transition away from what we initially hear when we hear the song. Your third music video text for the week is Demi Lovato's Made in the USA from 2013. This is a text that generally is not popular with students. I've found that students tend to be more critical of this video than complimentary. Um, but I elect to include it in this week of viewings because I think that in terms of color and costuming and kind of visual narrative, she's really offering us some things that are complementary to the Toby Keith and Karen Underwood. I do want you to be a bit more attentive here to how the lyrics and the visuals are working together. They are not necessarily as in harmony as we have as the Carrie Underwood and the Toby Keith, though I do also want you to pay attention to, akin to what we see with the Toby Keith, you're going to see Demi Lovato's text occasionally include kind of name brands in her lyrics. And I want you to kind of think about why that might be, but also how she is electing to represent the military in part of her kind of Americanness landscape when she's defining what it means to be made in the USA. Okay, so for each of these texts as well, I want you to be attentive to how the song's title contributes to some of this meaning making. And finally, you have MKTO's American Dream from 2014. This one I would compare much to like the Jeremy Zucker from week 1, where you have kind of multiple narratives interwoven into a kind of, in this case, double narrated text. I want you to be attentive to costuming. I also want you to kind of think a little bit about, akin to the Jeremy Zucker, how is MKTO's text electing to kind of include different narratives that provide different facets or perspectives on Americanness, what might be the goal there or the purpose, especially in thinking about the lyrics that they give us, right? How are the visuals potentially extending or complicating the messaging of the lyrics that you would initially only engage with through song, okay? And then I ask that you watch the video titled Week 2 Lecture after you have watched those music videos. And I've made a note here that it's important to always review the in-depth lecture prior to starting the weekly assignment. So you ideally want to do this at the end, but you don't necessarily want to start the assignment and then backtrack to the lecture because the lecture will have, information that you will need to do the assignment. It is also helpful to review and engage with the primary and secondary sources for the week prior to the in-depth lectures so that you can begin to make connections with concepts and themes, okay? So ideally, the kind of in-depth lecture is going to provide you with the most helpful resources when you are familiar with the primary and secondary texts for the week. If you've not looked at those, at times the in-depth lecture might kind of seem jarring or just not necessarily seem as clear-cut. Okay, so the goal for me when I prepare these in-depth lectures is that we're arriving from a mutual point of entry. We've all looked at, the same readings and the same viewings for that week. And so it's a little bit easier for me to introduce concepts or talk about themes or give historical context if you're familiar with what it is that we are kind of talking through as we build to the assignment, okay? Now, finally, I ask that you complete the assignment and submit it to Carmen by Sunday, May 23rd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Again, I want Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern to just be a phrase you're sick of hearing because you recognize it, because I want you to know that recommended weekly deadline by heart. Yes, you do have until the last day of the month in May, but it is recommended that you aim to submit this next assignment by Sunday, May 23rd. So again, the reminder at the bottom reads, all assignments listed for the month of May can be submitted up until the last day of the month, which this month is Monday, May 31st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. There is no late penalty for submitting assignments later than the weekly deadline listed above, but it is recommended that where possible, students try to submit work by the recommended deadline, which in this case is Sunday, May 23rd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Submitting work by the recommended deadline decreases how much work students need to get caught up on at the end of the month. That is, use the extended monthly deadline as needed, but be wary of relying exclusively on it instead of the weekly deadlines. I can't stop you if you choose to submit all work or most of the work at the end of the month. If that's the approach that works for you, by all means use it. Though I have to, caution you that if you elect to do all of the work at the end of the month, you are putting quite a bit of pressure on yourself, and you're assuming that future you has more capacity than present you. So my advice generally has been for students who want to kind of go at a slower pace, it makes sense to kind of work 2 weeks at a time as opposed to doing the whole month in 1 weekend, okay? All right, So let's go ahead and go through this assignment prompt and then we will wrap up. This should look very familiar to you. It is the exact same discussion board prompt that you had last week. So again, each discussion board post, and you have 4 of them for the semester, each one of them counts for 15 points and is due on the Sunday of the assigned week at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. This, of course, is a recommended weekly deadline. I'm so sorry if you're getting that horn in the background. Let me pause for a second. Okay, the magic horn in the background has stopped. All right, so as I was saying, 4 discussion board posts this semester, each of them worth 15 points. They are assigned to be submitted on the Sunday of the assigned week. That is once again a recommended weekly deadline. You have until the last day of the month to turn them in. Each discussion board post should be submitted through the discussions tab on our Carmen page, which by now you should hopefully have found. The discussion board that is active for that week will always be pinned to the top of the page. Again, late submission policy, and I reiterate this over and over and over again because without fail, I have students who email me asking me, can I turn this in late? And it becomes really obvious they have not read the syllabus, looked at the schedule of assignments, or looked at any of my materials. So I reiterate it over and over again, hoping that you know this information. Again, late submission policy, you can turn it in up until the last day of the month, not in August, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. I will not accept discussion board posts after the last day of the month unless we discuss a deadline extension for you in advance. That discussion should not happen the night or day that the assignment is due. And as a reminder, late submissions, and that means assignments turned in after the recommended weekly deadline, should be emailed to me. They should not be posted at the discussion board. The discussion board would not be active, so your one choice is to email it to me, turn it in via email, 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 email. Okay, beautiful. All right, again, as a reminder, when you log on to Carmen, this is what it should look like. Discussions tab on the left side where my arrow is pointing and where the oval is holding it, that is where you should go. And I used the screenshot from last week, so that's why you don't see discussion board post number 2, but it will say discussion board post number 2 at the top, and then you will be able to go right there and go ahead and turn in your discussion board post. As a reminder, on weeks that you are assigned a discussion board post, you are tasked with writing a response of 200 to 300 words, not less, not more. If it's less, you will be docked points. If it's more, you will not be, but you're putting in more effort than you need to. Stick to that 200 to 300. I don't want you writing me any more than that. This is the goal of being kind of an exploratory stream of consciousness post, right? I'm not looking for a formal essay. Again, you are writing about one text for the week. That is one text. You indeed have primary and secondary sources at your disposal for this week, but you are writing about one of them. You are welcome to make a very brief, casual, tiny mention of another post if it will help to complement what you are post, another source, text, whatever. If it's going to help complement what you're talking about with the primary or secondary source that you're choosing to write about, but it should not be that you're talking about each of them evenly, right? Like little tiny mention of another text is fine, so long as you are focusing the majority of your discussion board post on one text for the week, okay? One text, one text. All right. Again, you'll typically have a range of things assigned for the week. You're not writing about one primary and one secondary. You were writing about one text. It could be a primary, it could be a secondary. All right. In your response to the text, you are not required to produce an argument or in-depth analysis. If you give me that, that's awesome, but I'm not looking for it. Rather, your task is to identify and discuss a special detail or issue, or specific detail or issue in the text that you consider important and interesting to pay attention to. So one critical detail that you are honing in on. This detail or issue should correspond to the text's content, which is its message or argument, or form, how it looks or how it is presented to the viewer. You'll find that oftentimes in my feedback, I might push you a little bit and ask how the content and form influence each other, but I'm looking for you to address how the issue that you've decided to focus on corresponds to the content or form. Definitely impressed if you connect to both, that is the ideal. Your goal is to observe something interesting in the text that makes it effective in making an argument, telling a story, or communicating a message. So why does this thing do the thing that it does? And how does that thing that's doing what it does help us to make meaning of the text? Okay. All right, so basically, why is it cool? Why is it helpful? Or the opposite, why is it maybe obstructing information from being clear to the viewer, and so on and so forth. In your response, you might consider any of the following options or come up with your own. Your first option is compelling visuals. How does the text form, or the visuals, communicate a message or argument, the content, to the viewer? Is the form effective in getting this message to resonate with the viewer? Why or why not? Are there limitations to who can relate to or identify with this message, storyline, or argument? Your second option is made in the USA. How does this text represent or complicate how we define Americanness? Does it put forth a patriotic view of Americanness or a more critical view? Does it represent a diversity of people? If so, and how and why might it do so? Your third option is flash findings people. What observations can you make about how people or the protagonist, main character, are represented in the text? How does the text make use of details like makeup, costuming, an ensemble, body language, etc., to communicate an idea or theme or to tell a story? And then flash findings settings. What observations can you make about how the setting is portrayed in the text? How does the text make use of details like colors, objects, decorations, sound, etc., to communicate an idea or theme or to tell a story? So again, these are 4 options that you have of how you might pursue replying to the discussion board post prompt, or you might come up with your own prompt that you choose to write about. Any of those are fine. Just make sure it's 200 to 300 words written about one text, and is clearly addressing how this detail you've chosen to focus in on is engaging with content and or form. I am not looking for a summary of what happens in the text. I'm looking for you to just kind of dive into analyzing the significance of why certain things are there. Now, again, the discussion board posts are low stakes assignments, meaning that they are meant to act as an opportunity for you to observe and reflect on what you watched or read for that week. They are exploratory assignments rather than argumentative ones that is focused more on brainstorming and generating ideas about why a text might be structured the way it is, rather than concentrating on trying to provide a conclusion or assessment for it, okay? So I'm not looking for you to tell me, concretely, this is why this thing operates the way that it does. It's okay if you use kind of, tentative language in a way of like, I think it could be, or it might be, or it's interesting that, things that kind of allow you to speculate what might be the usefulness or significance of something. I'm not expecting you to have done additional research or to have kind of a very fleshed out discussion of the thing. I'm just looking for you to point at something that is cool in the text and kind of talk me through why it seems to be there, what it could be doing, and how it perhaps corresponds with or kind of allows us to answer one of the prompts, or allows you to kind of talk about something tangential to those, okay? And again, discussion board post number 1 and 2 should be responded to using this prompt, and discussion board post number 3 and number 4 will have different prompts that I provide. So to kind of round out this lecture, I've provided you with a checklist of the things that you need to accomplish in this coming week. Again, you need to watch the Week 2 overview, which is on YouTube. You need to read Dennis Green's Here's What Made in the USA Actually Means. Read Alyssa Mertes, The Truth About Made in the USA Products. Watch Carrie Underwood's All-American Girl. Watch Toby Keith's Made in America. Watch Demi Lovato's Made in the USA. Watch MKTO's American Dream. Watch the Week 2 lecture, which is on our YouTube. Review the prompt for the discussion board post number 2 and complete discussion board post number 2. Right? So that is everything that I have for you today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. As always, I apologize for noises from my cat and for noises on the street. I live on a busy street and my cat has an attitude. So those things will unfortunately be consistencies, and alas, there's not much I can do about either of those things. But I am super excited to have you in class this semester. I am very excited to read all of your writings as they start to take form. And as always, I have office hours on Mondays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern if you have questions, concerns, hopes, dreams, etc. Or if you would just like to check in and chat about things, I will be on Zoom during those times. And I'm happy to schedule office hours with you at a separate time if that time does not work. Okay? So I will see you again in my in-depth lecture, but for now, I am signing off and wishing you the best of luck as you start to navigate Week 2. Bye.